topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
And welcome to the Camping Show. I'm C.W. Getz.
And I'm Willow Munson.
It is Wednesday, September 8th, 2021, and we have a beautiful sunny, actually, I can tell you, it's beautiful, sunny, 77 degrees, but windy as heck, man. It is just, it's whipping around here. How is the weather in Pennsylvania?
It sounds about the same, except no wind, which allows the humidity to come in, making it less pleasant. So I'm kind of jealous.
Yeah, you don't like that humidity, huh?
Nope. East Coast humidity is not my thing.
No, I like humidity. I mean, there's a point, but I don't like fall just because it's so dry. I'd rather have some, I know.
Fall is my favorite season.
I know.
Especially in Minnesota.
Yeah. I think probably, we were talking before the show, that island of Tonga. I think that's something I really need to check.
Tropical.
Tropical sweat all day. I like that. It's supposed to be healthy, though, when you sweat, right? So I don't know. Who knows? Well, tonight's episode is brought to you by Campground Views, making camping easier.
And by Rooted Paddle Sports, providing time on the water.
Tonight's episode is all about canoes with our special guest, Bear Paulsen. Would you tell us a little bit about Bear, Will?
Yes. So Bear is an experienced wilderness adventurer, canoe builder, and writer. He's worked in the outdoor industry for over 25 years. His written works have been published in the Boundary Waters Journal, as well as other publications. Bear's extended canoe trips include the Yukon, Northwest Territories, Nunavut, I can never pronounce this word. Help me out here. I promise I can say it.
Yeah, Saskatchewan.
Manitoba, Ontario, Utah, and Montana. He's explored over 80 rivers in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and to date, his longest canoe trip was 139 days. For over 20 years, Bear has led more than 200 high school students on week-long wilderness canoe trips and winter camping trips in the Boundary Waters. And in 2013, he, along with his partner Ted Bell, launched the Princeton, Minnesota-based North Star Canoes. Bear frequently performs as a public speaker and also teaches classes at a number of outdoor events throughout the upper Midwest and Canada.
Well, with that, welcome to the show, Bear.
Welcome, Bear.
Thank you. Good to be here with both of you.
Yeah. Willow, I do follow along with you on these introductions, just so you know. I don't leave you out there hanging, man.
I promise I can pronounce that word half the time, but the other half, it trips me up.
Since we're doing true confessions, I have to tell you something, because I was like, let's see, tonight's guest, and I almost said Paul Bearson, and I swear I'm like going, that's not right. Stop. And I hesitated. I don't know. It's been one of those days, but yeah. How you doing, Bear?
I'm doing well.
Oh, man. So how's your weather there?
It is a beautiful fall day. We've got low 70s. It's getting down into the 50s at night, so it's great sleeping weather, great paddling weather.
That's exactly the kind of weather we're having. You like the dry stuff too, don't you? Like Willow. She's
like, it's nice not to have it raining. We are too dry right now, though. I mean, the Boundary Waters just reopened. It's been very dry in all of central and northern Minnesota, so we could actually use the rain.
Yeah, same here. I think we're a little late for the crops, though. But yeah, we're with you. Well, I'll tell you what. Let me ask you. Start off here. Where did the roots of the canoe actually originate?
So, canoes started out as dugouts. That's take a hollow tree or cut a tree down, burn out the center, scrape all those ashes out, burn some more, scrape, add thwarts to push it apart, and you've got a canoe.
I
So
didn't know they actually burned them. I just thought they actually just scooped them out. I did not know they burned them, but that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
yeah, well, when you don't have good tools, burning makes a whole lot of sense. With our tools now, it's totally possible to just edge tool them out, but
Right.
not in the early days.
Yeah. Wow. I learned something. I did not know that, and I should have known that, but I didn't.
And then, so of course, then the other type were bark boats. And so, you had your birch bark, which was primary, but there was also elm bark and quite a number of other barks that were utilized to build, for the most part, boats that behaved just like dugouts in the sense that you couldn't move them. But birch barks were the unique ones in the sense of, and those are North Americans explicitly, that you could actually pick them up and portage them, which truly are the roots of the modern canoe that we think of.
Right. Yeah. What did you do? I mean, those dugout canoes, how much do those have to weigh? I mean, I'm sure people have built them since then, but how much of those would that weigh?
Incredible amounts. Those, hundreds and hundreds of pounds.
Wow.
The biggest ones I'm sure are close to 1,000. I can't say I put a scale on any of them. But there certainly have been recreations. I mean, they tried to recreate Lewis and Clark's voyage down the Columbia. They made a dugout for that and ran it down and found out that dugouts follow the Deepwater Channel because they're so heavy. So that all you have to do is bail. You don't have to know how to steer.
That's nice. That's always good. Oh my gosh. Well, and then we complain about 68-pound boats, right? So,
yeah, exactly.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. I did not know that. I did not. Let me ask you this: what, the bark canoes? I mean, how was that? How were those assembled? Actually, I mean, or created? I guess.
Well, so all barks are peeled off the trees. So what they'll do is they'll seek out trees with very specific aspects that allow the bark to be peeled easily. When it comes to elm, which is a super stringy sort of thing. You've got to work hard to peel that, and then stitch it together the same way that they do birch bark. And each region varies in terms of how they stitch. In the case of the Indians or the natives, Untitled Fuego, so these are the Yakan Indians, they would build bark boats, but the bark boats weren't especially seaworthy in the sense that the kids would always sit in the center. And the kids had two jobs. Number one was to keep the fire going on a bed of moss. And number two was to bail.
Oh, wow. So the kids were the bailers.
Yep, they leaked. They leaked pretty heavily. And the males, the husbands would be in the front with a harpoon, and the women would be in the back paddling.
For real?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Well, and actually, the other thing that way is the women were the only ones that knew how to swim, because those canoes had to be anchored offshore. So the women would paddle the family in, the family would get out, then the women would paddle them back out onto the water and anchor them, basically, tie them off, and then they'd swim in.
That's pretty cool. I did not know any of this. This is good. This is very good. See, Willow, we're learning like leaps. This is question number one. And
I was like, whoa, go women power.
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
So then when was the modern canoe design developed?
It's been a steady evolution. So we went from birch barks, and then the next jump was into the wood canvas end of the world. And so those were wood boats, wood boats all the way through. And I shouldn't have said wood canvas. Earlier than that, there were wood boats. But we've had a consistent movement all the way through to aluminum. So there were wood canvas in the 1800s and the 1900s, early 1900s.
Okay.
Those boats were designed very much like birch bark boats, and then aluminum came to the forefront right after World War II, because of course we built all these B everything fighters, B-29s, what have you, B-52s, and all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, what do we do with all this excess aluminum capacity we all of a sudden have in 1945? And the result was, well, let's turn it into canoes. At least that was one of the aspects.
And beer cans, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Exactly. And so aluminum canoes ushered in a whole new way to build things, because, of course, everything had been based on wood previously, and wood bends in curves. It doesn't bend in any other shape than a curve. And so when you look at, any old wood canvas, any old wood boat, for the most part, and there are a few variances, birch barks included, all the ends have these nice, beautiful recurved stems. They look like canoes should look in most people's minds. Aluminum canoes mirrored that, because they said, well, everybody wants that shape, so heck, we'll build it. But really what they do is build them in two halves, and they use the keel to join the halves together. And so we went through the aluminum days, and then we finally moved into fiberglass. Later was Kevlar, carbon fiber, and then also some of the plastics. And of course, all the initial boats in those materials too were built with recurved stems. And then gradually the naval architects came in and said, why are we doing this? There's more efficient ways to build canoes. We don't have to include all those parts of the canoe that had to be included on those way old boats just because of the way that wood worked. Now we can do things without, no constraints, basically. We can make whatever shapes we want to. And so all those naval architects, with their CAD programs and that and the thing said, hey, let's change up the shapes a lot. And so now what we have primarily is Rake stems, which are, they include less material, which means they're lighter weight, less affected by wind, and they give the same or better performance in the water. So big evolution.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize that was why everyone kept that shape. Was because they said, well, let's just keep doing it. That's what everybody wants. That's interesting.
Yeah, and that's the expectations with keels too. Wood canvas had keels because they needed a sacrificial spot to wear. So you've got this beautiful piece of canvas, and then you put a keel under the bottom of it, and that's what takes the wear. And then the aluminum said, well, everybody expects there to be keels. That's where we can join the two halves together. This is great. And then, we started to build composite canoes. And of course, some of those early builders in Kevlar, carbon fiber, fiberglass, all that and the thing said, well, everybody wants keels. We'll put keels on. And then all of a sudden, we're saying, you don't need keels. What the heck do you want a keel for? It just slows the boat down, adds some weight. There's no point to them. But they're supposed to have them.
There is something to be said for certain traditions, however.
And canoes are very traditional. Canoes are very, very traditional.
Yeah. When it's counterproductive, I guess it's not always good, but yeah.
Well, how have hull designs evolved since the early days, and how have modern construction materials had an effect on design?
Well, the hull evolution is exactly what we just talked about in part. The remainder of that is we found different ways to build boats. One of the things that we do, let's back up. So dugouts, in order to spread those logs apart, they would put thwarts in. And the benefit of that, of course, was not only did they get a little bit extra capacity, they made the boat more stable because they added flair to the boat. So it was a very accidental, and I shouldn't, accidental is the wrong word. The evolution of the canoe helped create flair in those areas. The same things were done with birch bark boats and all the way really up until composites, and then some wood boats in the 70s basically. And then all of a sudden people started to play with other ways to shape boats, and did tumble home. And then what Bell Canoe, which was our predecessor company, came out with was shouldered flare. And this is a way to build a boat such that you have the most seaworthy boat possible, because when you have a flared boat and you lean it over in the water, it keeps getting more and more stable because it keeps getting wider and wider and wider. You keep exposing more hull to the water. And so shouldered flare is a way to create a boat that does everything that a flared boat does, but it also has the benefits of tumble home, which means that you can have a vertical paddle shaft. You don't bang your hands on the gunnels when you paddle from the center of the boat, which is what happens primarily on solo canoes.
Yeah.
And so canoes have gone through a lot of evolution due to not only naval architecture, but also just simple comfort. And shouldered flare is mostly about comfort, and it's, of course, a huge improvement on tumble home. So that's one of the things that's happened. Material-wise, you can't build a boat with shouldered flare in a birch bark. I don't think they could build an aluminum. I never really thought about that. But really, the modern materials are those that allow you to build a boat with shouldered flare. That would be your Royal X's and all the composites. And I should define composites because I'll use that word a lot. Composites are anything that you put together with resin. So that could be fiberglass, which was the original. That could be Kevlar. It could be carbon fiber. And then, of course, a new material that we're playing a lot with these days is a Negra, which is a polypropylene It's not the most expensive thing in the world, but has a lot of characteristics that allow it to behave similar to plastics in its durability. And so composites allow us to make whatever shapes we want. We're not governed by the material at all. So birch bark was very governed by the material in terms of the shape that you could make. Aluminum is very governed by the material. The material restricts what shapes you can make. Plastics are the same way. Composites have no barriers. You simply say, I want to make this shape, and away you go. And so that's what modern canoe design is. Composites allow us to make the most modern canoe designs.
Wow. I thought I had finished my classes for today, but I guess I get all this new material.
Bear, I will say this, and I used to do construction, but if they can make a rain gutter out of aluminum, all that shape that goes up, I'm pretty certain they could do that with a canoe with the tumble home, I would think.
It wouldn't surprise me at all if they could. I mean, honestly, the challenge with aluminum these days for aluminum canoe manufacturers is the car industry.
The
car industry is taking up all the aluminum.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yep. They have a really hard time sourcing materials these days.
Yeah. Interesting.
So what would you say are the pros and cons of the modern materials used in manufacturing canoes versus that which were used years ago, with respect to being susceptible to damage and also from a repair aspect? I know you touched on this a little bit, but I kind of want to hear it in more detail.
Well, and it's going to vary by material. So obviously birch bark was all natural materials. You paddle through the forest. If you did damage to it, you said, hey, let's go look for a birch tree. Now we need some pine pitch, put them together, and away we go. So birch bark were ideal that way, but of course they had a huge amount of maintenance requirements, because if you touched any significant number of rocks or did any significant damage to it, you were out of luck. I mean, you just can't recover a birch bark. Aluminum is a very different material that way. It's a metal. So it doesn't, birch barks, of course, degrade, they age. The materials themselves just age out. They wear out over time, just like a piece of wood does in the forest. Aluminum is a very different ball of wax that way. As a metal, it doesn't age. So it's a very attractive canoe to leave, stored in, you could just catch an aluminum canoe in the middle of the woods and forget about it for 5 years and go back to it. It's just going to have moss growing on it. But other than that, it's going to be fine. It's a challenge to repair because it requires welding. So it's not something that the average canoe owner says, oh, I'm just going to carry some welding equipment along when I go on a trip. So for the most part, it's hard to damage an aluminum boat. They are not really subject to abrasion. If you put a hole in one, for the most part on a trip, it's catastrophic. I mean, you see aluminum canoes abandoned throughout, especially Canada. In Ontario, Manitoba, especially, where the heaviest use of canoes has occurred. Routinely, you see spots where, an aluminum canoe is wrapped around a rock, or it's up on shore with a big hole in it or whatever, and they've just abandoned it.
I know that like Gorilla Tape really works very well for a temporary patch on plastics. All right, on
totally.
polys. How does it? And I've never had to patch an aluminum canoe with or try any tape like that. How does that Gorilla Tape work on aluminum? Bear?
Yeah, no, it'll totally work fine.
Does it? Okay. It's just the fact that these people aren't carrying that sort of stuff is the reason, right?
So what happens with an aluminum also is people have, how shall we put it, a sense that what they're paddling is somewhat indestructible.
Oh yeah.
So they're not very careful with it.
Metal company, they do that. It's mashed into rock. Yeah.
And one of the other things about aluminum that makes it very unique and also very challenging to paddle is it sticks to rocks. So it has a very high friction coefficient. So whenever you hit a rock with an aluminum canoe, in fact, in my early days of paddling, I inherited a Grumman from my father. We'd be running a rapid, and all of a sudden you do a 180 because you catch the side of the canoe on a rock and you just spin around.
Right.
Whereas plastics and especially composites, neither one of those, they both have very low friction coefficients, which means they just, they bounce off a rock, basically. They just graze along a rock and you keep moving downstream.
Right.
Repairability wise, duct tape, Gorilla Tape, is recommended for everything. Never always carry that. I carry that on day trips even, because you never know when you're going to say, the grip on my paddle just came off, and it's going to be really easy to tape it back on.
It's musician's best friend too, that duct tape and all that kind of stuff. So absolutely.
Exactly. I busted a yoke on a trip, and you cut out a stick and carve it for a while and get it to about the right shape to back up the yoke, and then lots of duct tape.
Yep. We call that a cripple.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of other repairability, composites compared to plastics, composites outlast plastics dramatically. So if you compare, the polyethylenes, the Roylexes, and now, of course, the later T4Mix is the new plastic out there. Right. Composites outlast all those materials 2, 3, 4 to 1 in terms of their longevity. So that's the great thing about composites, is people look at a canoe is, well, hey, you're going to pass this down to your kids, as opposed to especially polyethylene, which has a very short shelf life comparatively.
Yeah. Interesting.
And then ease of repair. Composites are certainly the easiest of the 3 common materials to repair, in the sense that, how do you repair a plastic canoe? You can plastic weld it. That's got its challenges. It's not the easiest thing to do. How do you repair a Roylex? You use composites to do that. So you use Kevlar and resin. How do you repair a composite canoe? You use Kevlar and resin. But the great thing, of course, is you're repairing like with like, and so it's very easy to work with. Yeah. And then you can also refresh a composite canoe. And if you look at what the Boundary Waters outfitters do, or the Adirondack outfitters, or a host of Canadian outfitters, they all do basically the same thing, which is they'll roll new resin over the old resin after it's been essentially all sanded off. And they don't make the canoe new, but they make it so it's got a whole new coat and it lasts a long time. You can't do that to any plastics. You can't do that to birch bark. You can do that to a wood canvas in the sense of replacing the canvas, but that's what it's most akin to.
Interesting. And curious, before we do because we're going to do a commercial break, but when they do that, they have to scuff that first and rely on a mechanical bond rather than a how do I want to say, a reactive bond. Like lacquer is a reactive, it melts the layer before it, whereas a polyurethane that's just abraded, and it's just a matter of creating some tooth. So is that kind of the same?
Yep. Yeah. You're completely correct. You're abrading. You've got to get all the shine off, and then
give it some tooth, as they say. Yeah. Interesting.
Well, we're going to take a break, but don't go away. We'll be back with more of The Camping Show on W4C Radio and Talk 4 TV after these messages.
It's time to go camping. Introducing Campground View's virtual tours. You can tour the campground, see the sites, see if they are available, and click to book your perfect spot. Hit the open road and explore the amazing places found in nature. We make it easy to discover, find, and book your site so that you can go have the fun and freedom you seek. Campground View's virtual tours make it easy and simple for you to see where you are going.
A few years ago, someone asked Rutabaga's owner, Darren Bush, "Hey, how long have you guys been selling boats?" Darren replied, "We don't sell boats. We sell time on the water." Of course, that comes in all types. We help people paddle more safely with Rutabaga outdoor programs. We rent canoes, kayaks, and stand-up paddleboards. We sell and install racks to get you from home to adventure. Rutabaga's got everything you need to get you out on the water, like paddles, life jackets, dry bags, and clothing. Rutabaga Paddle Sports, on the web at rutabaga.com. Mention you saw this ad on The Camping Show.
And we are back with our guest, Bear Paulsen, on The Camping Show. Bear, I'm going to just go through these real quick. I've got a bunch of terms, and we've got quite a few questions left for you here. But And you already talked about China, or I think it's tumble home. But anyway, let's go through this real quick and just give us a brief definition of these. First, the hull. Everybody knows what the hull is. Different shapes. Can you give us a few different shapes, the most popular ones?
Well, hull shape wise, you've got touring hulls, so efficient for lake travel. You've got whitewater hulls, best for spinning circles, going down rapids, what have you, going over waterfalls. We actually are playing with a few of those ourselves with our whitewater lamination.
Cool. Okay, so we'll go to chine. How about chine?
Chine is where the boat transitions. If I'm a boat, right in here is the chine. So it is the transition from the side to the bottom. You can have a very soft chine, a very gently curved chine, or you can have a very hard chine like an aluminum canoe does, more of a right angle. Which
is more suitable for a lake than it would be a river, am I right?
Yeah, it's inefficient either way. Because you've got, when you enclose things with a circle, of course, you've got the least surface area. When you close things as a box, you've got a lot of extra and unuseful surface area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then tumble home, we talked about that a little bit. Go ahead.
Tumble home is where a canoe tucks in just a little bit at the gunnel, such that it's easier to paddle. You can have a vertical paddle stroke on the exterior. And you can actually see this. There's an article on our website called Shouldered Flare that does discuss this much better than I'm going to be able to. But essentially, tumble home makes it easier to paddle a solo canoe such that you don't bang your hands on the gunnels.
Yeah. How about flare?
Flare makes for the driest canoe. And so the goal of every canoe builder when it comes to a tandem canoe is to utilize as much flare as possible to make the driest boat possible. While still making it comfortable to paddle. When it comes to solo canoes, then tumble home comes to the forefront. But what we did in the years at Bell, was shouldered flare. So we combine the benefits of both tumble home and flare into one canoe, which is shouldered flare.
Interesting. Symmetry.
Symmetry means you've got a boat that's the same on either end. So if we cut a boat in half at the yoke, it's identical on either end. So it's predictable to paddle. It's what all early canoes were because it was just the easiest way to make a boat. Why on earth would you consider anything else? Up until we started to play with naval architecture a little bit, and we said, there might be some more efficient ways to do this if we're trying to go in a straight line, and that's where asymmetry came from. And asymmetry is with regard to not only the hull shape, but also with regard to the rocker profile.
Oh, interesting. Fullness.
Fullness is right along the quarter ship. So near where you put your feet or your knees in the bow and then just behind the stern paddler. Fullness is the ability to ride up and down over waves rather than to knife right through them. So it's placing a value on seaworthiness is what fullness does.
How about the entry line?
Entry line is how sharp or blunt the entry of the boat is. And so composites allow us to make a very fine entry line, a very efficient entry line. When you look at plastics especially, they're much more governed by what the material is not capable of doing, which is making a fine entry line. So they tend to have much more blunt entry lines that are less efficient to paddle.
Yeah, interesting. The stem, square and rounded.
So stems are what we talked about with regard to the recurve. So that nice, let's see if I can do this, a nice little curve shape like is on all old wood canvas boats, on most aluminum canoes. When you do a plumb stem, you've got a race boat. So the goal there is to maximize your waterline length. And then most canoes that are built for touring these days will have what we call a rake stem, which means it's just got a slight, it goes out a little bit further at the bow deck and just cuts in just a little bit. So the waterline length is just a little bit less than the actual length of the boat. And what that's, of course, doing is creating a little bit of dryness for the paddlers.
The keel, T and shoe.
So keel is something we want to avoid. Keels are, again, what are used to join the two halves of aluminum, what are used to protect wood canvas boats, which have no basis or benefit on a modern canoe.
Where are they? Okay, where a canoe is measured There are 3 places, and where are those? The depth of the canoe.
Well, there's more measurements than that, but let me just rattle them off. So there's length. So that's a 17-foot canoe, 16-foot canoe, whatever. And then there's width in the center. And so that would be for us, it would be gunnel width. So the width at the gunnels, then the maximum width, and then the waterline width. So that'd be those 3 measurements perhaps. And then there's also a rocker, and I'm sure you're going to get to that. That's another measurement. But then there's also the shear line, which would be the bow depth, the center depth, and the stern depth.
Okay, that's the ones I was referring to as those 3. Yeah, the depth, the 3 places where the depth was measured. But yeah, those are a lot. There are a lot of measurements in it.
There are a lot of measurements, no doubt about it.
Gun whales, which no one says anymore, or gunnels.
Gunnels, rails.
Yeah.
The funny sticks on the sides of the boat.
Yeah, and basically that's And and I actually did know. I do know why they call them gun whales, because the old gunboats. That's where that term came from. Yeah. Rocker. Now this sounds like a Eddie Van Halen thing here, right?
Indeed. So rocker's the shape of the keel. So if you put the boat flat on a flat floor, and the whole boat touches the floor, you've got 0 rocker. If the ends come up, you've got rocker. The more the ends come up, the more rocker there is. The more rocker there is, the more maneuverability there is. The more the boat it becomes suitable for, not only moving water, but just general usage in conditions where you're not trying to go as fast as possible, but you're just going in and out of the shoreline and the other things. Those are places where rocker benefits. If you're racing, you want 0 rocker.
Beam, and not the Jim Beam.
That's beam is the width of the boat. That's what I covered earlier. So that is literally the width of the boat. Maximum beam, like I said, gunnel width, and then waterline beam. And
thwart and yoke. We'll put those together.
Okay, so thwarts are what are spreading the boat. So in a solo canoe, you've got 2 thwarts. In a tandem canoe, you've got 2 thwarts, but a lot of people call them 3 thwarts because they include the yoke as a thwart. And so the carrying yoke is in the center of the boat. That's usually got a neck cut out, and that's the 3rd thwart. And in a few cases, people will call the grab handles thwarts as well. And so they'll say, got 5 thwarts, but it's all terminology.
Now that I didn't know they'd actually refer to those handles as thwarts, but yeah, I guess they would be.
Definitely. And actually, let's do just the little spin-off of thwarts, and that is, here's the question back, which is, what happens if you increase the length of a thwart on the same hull?
Okay. What does happen?
So what you do when you do that is you increase the rocker. You actually spread that boat out and you pull the ends up.
Yeah.
So you create a boat that's got better whitewater characteristics by increasing the length of the thwarts, or pulling those thwarts in increases the flat water performance. Of course, you can't do that very much in composite canoes just because of the way they're built, but on plastics, you can do that a ton, and you can do it to a limited degree on composites as well.
Interesting. Yeah, because they're very flexible that way.
Yep.
Freeboard.
Freeboard is how much of the boat is out of the water when you've got, any amount of load in it. So if I put myself in a solo canoe, I'll have, let's say, 8 inches of freeboard. And then if I load it with gear and a dog, I'll have 6 inches of freeboard. So I'll have less freeboard the more weight I put in it.
Skin or layup?
So that is the building process on a composite canoe. So the skin coat could be either a gel coat or a resin coat. The layup would be what materials we've actually chosen to build the boat with. So that'd be your Kevlars, your carbon fibers, and whether it has a foam core or not for stiffening.
Tracking.
Tracking is how well a boat goes in a straight line. So it's a contrast to how well it maneuvers. So you either get one or the other. We can, with asymmetry, get a lot of both. And so that naval architecture thing that I keep referring to, building asymmetric canoes on our touring side of things allows us, utilizing asymmetry on our touring canoes allows us to have a canoe that tracks well and is maneuverable. So we can aim for the best of both worlds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Asymmetry.
Last two, we're going to put those together: primary and secondary stability.
So primary or initial stability is how comfortable a boat feels right when you sit down in it. And so if you get into a rowboat, you say, hey, I can stand up in this thing. This thing's stable. And if you get in an aluminum canoe, frequently that same thing is the case because they have very flat bottoms. What happens when you disengage that flat bottom and you put a flat bottom on a wave is all of a sudden you lose your stability because that once that flat bottom disengages, boat goes over. And so when you do a slightly more rounded hull, what we call a shallow arch most commonly these days, we modify that a little bit into an elliptical hull, and we do that flare thing where they flare all the way out. We can create a hull that has excellent secondary stability, which is resistance to capsizing. And so translation, when you get into the wind and the waves and you get into rough weather and water, you want a boat with good secondary stability because that's the boat that is most resistant to capsize. When you're on flat water, a boat with high initial stability feels very comfortable, but its initial stability is like a tricycle where you cruise along and then you take a turn and you go, oh my God, one of my wheels just came off the ground and now my head hit the pavement. And
Great
a
analogy.
bicycle is like secondary stability, which is, guess what? You go around the corner nice and clean. That's secondary stability.
I like that. That's very good. Like a tricycle. That's yeah, that's perfect. Perfect.
Well, I want to see some photos now. So Roxy, can we have you put up the photos that Bear sent us and we'll have him tell us about each of those?
That is me. Woohoo!
I love
that is me on my son's first canoe trip. Dasho was 29 days old and we took him to the Boundary Waters for 18 days.
Oh, I remember you talking about that. Yeah. Wow.
And that is that same trip. That's one of our portages. You know, we didn't travel fast. We had 9 days of snow out of the 18. And so we did a fair bit of base camping on that one, but we did move around some.
I love it.
There's Dash, 2 years older. So he was about 2.5 at this point. Or no, sorry, wait, I'm wrong. 1.5 at this point. Last year, thanks to COVID, we couldn't go very far afield, or at least we didn't feel very safe going far afield. And so we did a trip near our house. And so we started from International Falls. For anybody that knows Minnesota, that's Voyageurs National Park. We paddled across the Voyageurs National Park, across the Boundary Waters. We did the Grand Portage. We went down the shore of Lake Superior for a couple of 100 miles. We went up the Wa Brule River in Wisconsin. That's where this shot was actually taken. We're very near the headwaters. And then we went down the St. Croix and up another little river and paddled back to our house over 38 days and 600 miles.
Wow.
And there is the end of Grand Portage. And boy, were we happy to have finished 8.5 miles with 5 heavy loads because we did the trip without resupply. That is a shot that a friend of North Star's took, and it's fitting, of course, that the canoe is the magic in there, and Northern Lights dancing all over the place. But that is the Boundary Waters.
That last picture was incredible.
Oh yeah, Brian Hansel is a gifted photographer.
Wow. The canoe almost takes away from the Northern Lights. It's glowing in the picture. So there are paddlers who are apprehensive about drilling holes in their brand new $3,000 canoe for installing airbags and applying permanent adhesive to keep knee pads and D-rings. What sort of advice or reassurance might you offer on this subject?
You know, I mean, first of all, you've got to make the boat yours. I mean, that's really the first and foremost thing that I can say. And that's true with all gear. I mean, I also teach winter camping classes and that and things. And I always tell people, it's like, you know, you've got a liner in your glove and you're getting a little cold on your thumb because they didn't design it well enough for the size of your thumb. Cut the liner off and leave the shell. And so you modify things. You've got to modify things to make them more comfortable for you, to make them yours. Canoes are expensive. There's no question about it. And really, they're not very expensive in the grand scheme of things when you consider that they take 20 or 25 person hours to build, and there's a lot of expensive materials in them. And so you don't get too many things that are hand built the same way a canoe is anymore. But anyway, back to the question at hand. And what I really want to get across to people is don't hesitate to do it. What's the worst that's going to happen? Composites are very forgiving, for one. When it comes to gluing, all you do is use acetone to get most adhesives out, and you can correct any mistakes. When it comes to drilling, you might end up with an extra set of holes, but you know what? You're far better off ending up with an extra set of holes than you are having a boat that you don't paddle because you didn't modify it for yourself, because you didn't make it yours.
That's really well put. Yeah.
Absolutely. Hey, real quick, how do you go about suiting paddlers? You know, if they come in, they want a canoe, they want to order one. How do you go about suiting up with the correct type, style, size, and design that's best suited for their needs? And by the way, just to let you know, don't mean to rush you. We're about 7 minutes left of the show. So
got it. Okay, I'll be short. So, we've got, I don't know what it is, 35 retailers nationwide and a few international distributors. And so ultimately, for the most part, it's their employees that have those conversations with people on the ground. But we routinely get phone calls from paddlers asking us those types of questions. And ultimately, it's where are you going to paddle? How heavy are you? How heavy is your gear? So it's dialing all that sort of thing in. How long are you going to go out for? What conditions do you want to paddle in? Are we talking about whitewater wilderness trips? Are we talking about day trips? Are we talking about the boundary waters? Everything under the sun that way. And of course, for most people, it's, I want to do some of this and I want to do some of this. And so you're trying to kind of average things out. Some of the hardest people to deal with, some of the hardest people to advise, I shouldn't say deal with, but advise are those that say, well, I'm going to go solo 75% of the time, but I need to be able to take my wife, my girlfriend, my brother, my husband, my whatever along. And so I have to have rent the tandem, buy the solo. It's all sorts of conversations like that. So ultimately speaking, we spend a fair bit of time on the phone with people. People email and we just say, you know what, it's easier to call to get the nuances, just like we are right now. It's very hard to get the nuances if we were just rat-a-tat-tatting away via email. Yeah. It doesn't work the same, but it really is. It's just about spending a bunch of time talking with people. I actually did a series of YouTube videos this spring that try to help distill that a little bit so they can come into the conversation with a little bit more of a baseline, a little bit more like, well, I'm thinking about these two boats. Talk to me about which one I should go with to help distill it for them a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, we did just get a question asking how light are these canoes that you're talking about here?
18 pounds is the lightest solo that we build right now. And I think 33 or 32 is the lightest tandem.
Okay.
And so we can make them pretty airy if you want. The average tandem is more in the 40-pound range. The average solo is more in the mid-20s to high 20s.
And how many models do you offer? And are there different styles and features to choose from?
Oh, my God. Yes. We have 17 models, which explains why we need to have conversations with people. Wow. And within each one of those models, we have anywhere from 2 to 5 different laminations, ways to build them. We have up to 3 types of trim, and then we have a fair number of options in addition to that. So yeah, there's a lot to look through.
How, and real quickly on this here, we're winding down about 5 minutes, but how did this has this pandemic situation affected supply and demand at North Star?
It's nutty. We were closed for 3 weeks due to the Minnesota governor's order. And then he said, hey, marinas and golf courses can reopen. And we kind of looked at each other and said, well, we're close enough to marina. We're going to start. Yeah. And so for a couple of weeks, we did the skeleton crew. It's like we wanted to be careful. We wanted to make sure that, we weren't running afoul of anyone. And so it's like, You know what? We had 3 laminators. We had 1 guy doing trim. And then me answering the phones in the office as opposed to doing it remotely the way that I had been for the past 3 weeks. Right. And then gradually it was like, nope, we're getting busier. Well, we're getting busier. We're getting busier. And so last year in June, I think we had 12 employees. Right now we're sitting at 22.
Wow.
And so it's amazing what it's done for business. In fact, one of my jobs, and there's lots of them in a small business, but one of those has always been to sell the canoes. And what I do now, instead of saying, hey, do you want to buy more canoes, is I tell my retailers and my outfitters that they can't have as many as they want because we can't build them. So it's flipped things on its head in a lot of different ways. And then, of course, supply chain wise, we've also been introduced to challenges. We've been able to avoid the worst of the issues, I think, that a lot of people have had, just because we've been at this for so long, and we've got good relations with our suppliers, and we're well capitalized, which means we can pull in extra supply. We don't do just in time on that end of the world. But for anybody that's not aware of it, the Texas freeze, that's the petrochemical industry. That is resins, that is foams, all those things were hugely affected supply chain wise. And you hear about like the freighter in the Suez Canal. I mean, all that stuff just ripples through supply chains.
Yeah.
It's nutty.
So is there anything new in the store from North Star Canoe for 2020?
Well, we thought there would be, but our research and development department is primarily building canoes at present.
Yeah, it's a different environment.
Yeah, we it's still one of those things that we've got some things on the docket. We've got designs that are partway through the process, but we're nowhere near ready to announce what they are or say, hey, this is going to be available, because we don't know when it's going to be ready.
Okay.
Understandable.
So where should our viewers and listeners go to learn more about these amazing canoes you build at North Star?
Well, northstarcanoes.com is our website, so that's an easy spot. It's got our phone number and info about email and that kind of thing, so that's easy location. In fact, all the videos that I referenced are on there too. There's a little section on there called the Explore section. There are an endless number of articles about shouldered flare and about all sorts of funky canoe stuff, basically, as well as the videos. Beyond that, we've got retailers, and so our retailers' inventories are a little bit challenged these days because people buy canoes before they show up at the retailers. So in many cases, the retailers don't have that many to show, but they do have some. And it's certainly worth stopping by the retailers and just chatting with them and getting a look to see, I want to see Starlight, one of the laminations in person. I want to see this boat in person. And, there certainly are canoes scattered around out there, and we're building them as fast as we can and delivering them as quick as we can. So everybody is getting resupplied routinely.
They are marvelous canoes. A friend of mine bought one, and I got a chance to check it out, and just beautiful, wonderful canoes. So absolutely do great work there. Well, we'd like to thank you, Bear, for being our guest here on the Camping Show. It was certainly a pleasure having you here this evening.
Well, thank you both for the questions, for inviting me, and being interested in North Star.
You're very welcome. Very welcome.
We'd also like to thank our sponsors, Campground Views and Rutabaga Paddle Sports, for bringing you tonight's show.
Yes.
Go ahead. I'm sorry I cut you off.
You're
good.
Go ahead. Just be sure to tune in for next week's episode, and we'll see who we got for a guest. We had somebody cancel, so we're working on filling that spot right now.
Until then, thank you for tuning into the Camping Show.
This is C.W. Getz
and Willow Munson,
reminding you,
learn more,
do more.
See you next week.